Are you looking for a little magic in your life? Maybe a little coconut flavored magic? Well, I have the perfect solution for, hold on. Here with my magic coconut pie. It might seem impossible to have a coconut pie on a weight loss journey, but I've got you covered. So if you'd like to see how I do this and get a little magic in your life, stick around because it's coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Roy. I'm a home cook and amateur baker, and I'm here on this channel sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now today is one of mine, but it's based on an old recipe from Betty Crocker on their Bisquick package. They had all of these different kinds of pies that they would do, and they were called Impossibly Easy whatever pie. And one of you subscribers, I want to say it was Wanda, but I'm not entirely sure. My memory is not that great. So forgive me that I've forgotten for certain who it was who mentioned these pies, but I thought this was a great idea to do. Now, I had done a magic quiche a short time ago, which is basically the same kind of principle. So I've named mine Magic Coconut Pie, just to keep that theme going of pies where you don't need to make a crust. And I opted for a coconut pie because I know someone had asked a while back for a coconut cake. And I thought, until I get that done, this might be the next best thing. It's going to be pretty quick and easy, so let's go over the ingredients. I have here 1 3/4 cup of almond milk, and that is at room temperature because I want to make sure this comes together. As I always say, make sure your ingredients, especially for baking, are at room temperature so they will come together more easily. I have here my cooking spray. Of course, you could also use baking spray, but I'm going to be spraying my 9-inch pie plate. This is actually 9.5, but it's not going to matter that much. But that is the size of pie plate that I'm using. And you do want to make sure that it is sprayed so this will come out more easily. Here I have 3/4 cup of shredded coconut, and that is surprisingly sweetened coconut. I've used unsweetened in the past, and I was shocked to find that there's really not much of a difference in the bites and points for sweetened versus unsweetened. For 3/4 cup of unsweetened, it was 21 bites. I'm on the Healthy Better Balanced plan, which is equivalent to the old WW Blue plan. So those are the bites and points that I give. But on the Better Balanced plan, unsweetened was 21 bites, and this sweetened is a 22 bites. So it's not going to affect the overall bites and points on this. Here I have 4 eggs that have been lightly beaten, and you want to lightly beat them ahead of time because that way they're easier to incorporate into the mixture, and they are, of course, at room temperature. Here I have 1/2 cup of flour, and that is going to help with the magic part of this by helping it to come together and hold instead of having to have a crust. Here I have 2/3 cup of sugar replacement. Whatever one you use is fine. I have here 1/4 cup of light butter, and I'm using the, I can't believe it's not butter light. Others may have a bite or point difference, but that is the one I prefer to use. And we are going to be melting that down, but I'll show you that in a moment. I have 3/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 3/4 teaspoon of coconut extract. Now that's really gonna help us enhance the coconut flavor. And I had reduced the amount of coconut from those original pies to bring it down a little bit in bites, points, calories, and macros. I do wanna enhance that coconut flavor, so I'm using the 3/4 teaspoon with 3/4 of vanilla. Now you could go up to a teaspoon of coconut extract if you wanted more coconut flavor. I think it's perfect as is, but if you wanted a little more, you could bump it up a little bit. I wouldn't go too much further with the extract, the coconut, because some of them can get that artificial taste in your product. and you don't want that. So I would stick with at least 3/4 of a teaspoon up to a teaspoon, and then just reduce the vanilla if you do increase the coconut. I have here 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Those two are going to help me create kind of like a Bisquick kind of concoction with the flour, but you could just replace those 3 items for 1/2 cup of self-rising flour. Here in the Northeast, self-rising flour isn't that common to find as it may be like down south. So I usually just make my own if a recipe calls for it. All right, so those are all of the ingredients. Now I'm just gonna shuffle a few things around as I always do, and we'll get started. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to take my coconut and I want to add the almond milk to it so that it has a chance to rehydrate a little bit before it goes into the oven. So I'm just going to stir that around to get that coconut mixed in with the almond milk, and I'll set this aside for now. And I'm going to mix together my Bisquick kind of ingredients here, the flour, the baking powder, and the salt. And just with a fork, I'm just gonna whisk those things together. And you wanna get that salt and baking powder evenly dispersed, because that way there aren't pockets of either salt or baking powder, and the baking powder could maybe make some parts inflate a little bit more than others. So you want this well incorporated, and that looks good. So now I will set that aside. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to melt my butter. It's supposed to be melted and then slightly cooled. So what I usually do, I don't melt it all the way. I let some of the butter remain intact, then I whisk it together and that cools it down so you don't have to wait as long for it to become slightly cooled. So let me get this microwaved. All right, and I've got it microwaved, and you can see that there is still a lump of butter in there. But that clump of butter is going to help me to get this to cool a little bit faster. So I'm just going to whisk that again with a fork just to get that center melted down and basically cool down the rest of the butter, the liquid butter here. All right, so that's mixed together. I have my coconut soaking. I want the coconut to soak for about 5 minutes. So let me let this cool, that soak, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes that the coconut's been soaking. The butter has been cooling. Now I'm going to take the sugar replacement and add that into the liquid because I want that to disperse throughout without any interference from like the flour. So I'm just going to whisk that in with the milk and coconut. And you just want to get that kind of dissolved. It doesn't have to be too precise. It will obviously cook more in the oven. So now I'm going to add in the beaten eggs, melted butter, coconut extract, and vanilla extract. And now just whisk that all together. And this is definitely easier with those eggs having been lightly beaten, but you do want to make sure that you get those eggs broken up a bit more and incorporated into the mixture here. Now you could use an electric mixer for this if you want, but I don't really think it's necessary, but that's your call. Okay, now the last little bit is we're going to sprinkle in the flour mixture as we're whisking, so that way we can try to avoid having big clumps form in our batter. So just sprinkle that in as you're whisking, and you will still get little clumps on occasion, so don't worry about that too much, but this will help to prevent some of that from happening. And then just scrape down the sides, make sure you're getting all of that flour incorporated, because as I said, that is going to be the magic part of this. It's going to help us to create our pie without the pie shell. If you see any larger lumps of flour, then you can press them down against the sides and try to break that up a little bit. But just whisking fairly vigorously should break those up enough. And if there are small clumps, don't worry about it at all. Okay, so that is well incorporated. I'm going to slide that over and bring in my pie plate, which is sitting on a baking sheet. I think it's easier with a liquid pie like this to carry it on a baking sheet. I have trouble anyways with my little muscle spasms that I get. So I definitely want to make sure I have that, but I think anybody who's had any issues with carrying things to the oven, it's just easier to have a baking sheet underneath. So I'm going to take this and just pour this all into our pan here and scrape out any of that goodness that is trying to stay behind, because we are taking the bites and points for it. We want to make sure we get every bit. Okay, so now this is going to go into a 350-degree oven for 45 to 50 minutes until a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean. Now, as it's baking, you will see the sides start to puff up, and you might think you're doing something wrong, but you're not. Once it starts to cool, that'll all settle down, so don't worry about that. So in the oven for 45 to 50 minutes, and I'll be back. Okay, there we have it, my magic coconut pie. It's a little puffy right now. It's golden around the edges, which is what you want, and if the center is still sunken in a little bit, it's not ready to come out. You want it to all be kind of domed up, and a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean. And I can take this off of the baking sheet now that it is done and set, and I will set this directly onto the cooling rack to let it speed up. It's cooling a little bit more than if it was still sitting on a hot pan. Now, that is the problem, is now we have to wait at least an hour. You can eat this after it's cooled for an hour, but personally, I prefer it after it's cooled down and then refrigerated. I love the texture much better. So I am going to cool this to room temperature, then put it in the fridge for about an hour or so just to get it a little firmer. And then I'll be back to show you what it looks like and give you all of those nutrition facts. So I'll be back. All right, so it's been about 3 hours since my pie came out of the oven. And once it cooled down after about an hour or so, I put it in the fridge to help it to firm up. Again, like I said, you don't have to put it into the fridge. You can have it right after an hour, but it will be a little softer, and I like the texture of it being refrigerated, but it is totally your call. Now, as you can see, I have already cut it up, so I didn't have to do that on camera, and I cut it as 8 servings. That's how I typically do it. So those are the bite points, calories, and macros that I will be giving. Now, obviously, you could make the portion smaller if you want, but I do like that this is a nice, hearty little portion. I don't feel unsatisfied after eating this. Definitely a satisfying dessert, but if you want it smaller, you go right ahead. Now, one thing I did want to mention, if you are watching your sugar intake, then using unsweetened coconut would definitely be the way to go, because that brings the sugars in this down to 0.6 grams per slice. Now, it may not be too bad as is, but if you wanted to drop it even more, find the unsweetened coconut for this recipe. But for as I've done it here, the bites and points are only going to be 4 per serving. Again, you could reduce that by making smaller portions, but I am willing to give up 4 bites for this delicious dessert. And if you are following calories, the calories for 1/8 of this pie is only 145 calories. And if you were following macros, the fat would be 8.2 grams, the saturated fat would be 3.9 grams, the protein would be 4.5 grams, the carbs would be 28.8 grams, the fiber would be 1.7 grams, and sugars would be 4 grams, as I made it with a sweetened coconut. Again, if you used unsweetened, it would bring those sugars down to 0.6 grams. But I will list the unsweetened and sweetened in the recipe, just so you have the macros. The calories don't actually change, nor do the bites or points. But I hope that you enjoyed this recipe and this video for a quick and easy magic coconut pie. And if you did, I'd appreciate you doing the usual: like, subscribe, comment, share, and hit that notification bell for the next time I upload any sort of video. And if you are looking for the recipe, I will link directly to this recipe down in the description box, as well as to the blog itself if you're looking for any of my recipes. Also down there, you'll find my Amazon storefront, my Built Bar rewards, Fetch rewards, and my social media, both my Instagram and 3 Facebook groups that I'm part of. So go check out the description box for all sorts of information. So I think it's about time for dessert, and I hope that you'll be enjoying some of this yourself very soon. Add a little magic to your life. And until next time, bye.